A strong Leinster team hockey Ospreys to finish second in the log. My name's Mark. Let's talk rugby. As I said, Leinster picked a fairly strong side for this one. Kind of a hybrid team, but lots of first team players in there, and certainly a lot of players in that 23 that would hope to, have some kind of involvement in the Champions Cup final next week as well. It's great to see. If you've been a long-term viewer of the channel, you know that one of my big criticisms of Leinster around this time of the year is the fact that they rest players too much, but also that they were basically splitting their squad up, and making it very clear that this group of players are the Champions Cup players and this other group of players are the URC players. We haven't seen that in the last 2 weeks. I think it's absolutely brilliant. So if Leinster lose next week, you're not going to hear a peep out of me in terms of complaints about the preparations. I think they've been as good as they could have been given the season that Leinster have had. So I'm very happy with that. And I said, not going to complain about things next week. I've been banging the drum on this for long enough, so I can't change my tune now, right? Right, so let's get into the game. So Conan marauding out wide, gets into 22, links up with Van der Fleer. Leinster then move infield, get through a number of phases, getting closer and closer to the line before Joe McCarthy batters his way over. It's converted for 7 points to 0. And that all came from an overthrow at the Ospreys line out claimed by Josh Van der Fleer as well. Just that, sharpness in the team there, really good to see. And we saw that a lot from Leinster today as well. Looked a lot more kind of cohesive. Leinster then win a scrum against the head. They move it, and returning James Lowe kicks a brilliant 50-22, gets him in good position. Leinster then, not long after, over again through Deegan, but we have a TMO check. Moriarty, he got over the ball and looks like he had turned it over, but then Deegan actually strips the ball off him and is able to score. So try stands, convert for 14 points to 0. A Leinster lineout goes awry, and then Daniels takes it on as 22, but he's stopped 5 meters out by Lowe, who gets over the ball to win a penalty. Really good return to the team from James Lowe. And a lot of players that we haven't seen maybe in recent weeks as well, putting in really good shifts in this one. Ospreys then go to 10 meters out from a penalty as Van der Fleer was pinged for not rolling away. Watkin comes on a really nice line as they move it from the line out, but Leinster managed to halt him and then they're beginning to march him back away from their line. Watkins then involved again. These go through a gap, but Leinster are able to intercept. Jameson gives a park, then puts Conan through a gap up the middle as Leinster attack off a scrum. Conan in behind then finds Van der Fleer in support. He goes over to score, converted for 21 points to 0. Leinster then score again almost immediately. Ringrose puts Jimmy O'Brien through a gap. He exchanges pass from Gibson Park before going over to score the bonus point try. That's converted for 28 points to 0. Ospreys then with a sustained period of possession in around the Leinster 22, but there are errors at crucial moments. Leinster, clearing but not really keeping it away, and then some incisive running and a lovely hands as well. It gets them back into 22. They go through the phases before Sutton goes over to score. That's converted for 28 points to 7. That was a halftime score. In the second half then, Morgan Williams, poor kick just outside his own 22. They can't claim the ball, so Gus McCarthy gathers it, offloads to Larmour, who then puts Ringrose over to score, converted for 35 points to 7. Jimmy O'Brien then puts a lovely kick in behind on a turnover ball. Larmour gets to the bouncing ball first, controls it, gets over to score, converted for 42 points to 7. Ball then squirts out of the side of an Ospreys ruck under real pressure from, a much improved Leinster defence. Joe McCarthy scoops up that ball, bats away a couple of would-be tacklers, and goes over to dot down. Conversion missed, 47 points to 7. Ospreys then Leinster 22, looking for under a score. They then kind of move it outside the 22, going for deep runners, trying to get it to width, but Larmer comes out of the defensive line, gets in the passing channel, picks off the pass, and he goes in from about 70 metres, convert for 54 points to 7. Jimmy O'Brien then makes a half break, offloads to Henshaw. He finds Joe McCarthy, who completes his hat-trick, converted for 61 points to 7. Lovely hands then from Leinster as they get low one-on-one on the left. He goes over in the corner, converted for 68-7. Then we have really well worked try by Ospreys as Dan Edwards goes over in the corner. Some nice hands in the build-up there. Easily their best move of the game as well, converted for 68 points to 14, and that was our full-time score. So let's have a look at stats, and then we'll have a chat about each of the teams. So let me pull the stats up here on the official website. So first of all, 10 tries to 2 in favour of Leinster. 47% to 53% in possession. So Ospreys with actually a lot more of the ball, but a lot of time lacked, cutting edge, or even when they found it, they couldn't, build on that with sustained kind of quality. There was always, mistake here and there. Offloads then 13 to 9, meters gain 891 to 282. So you can see Leinster just absolutely, being able to make meters almost at will. Clean breaks 20 to 6. Defenders beaten then 27 to 26. So Leinster converting better than 2 in every 3 defender beaten into clean break, which is brilliant to see from them. And Ospreys ran about 1 in 4. Territory then 45 to 55%. So again, Ospreys bossing that stat, but not getting any return from it. On to kicks then. Kicks and play 27 to 22, which is kind of around the average. And, if you've been watching other reviews, a lot of games this year have actually been kind of weirdly away from the average, either like a lot more kicks or a lot less kicks, but generally in around 20 to 25 kicks or so is kind of the sweet spot. Kick success then from the tee, 90% for Leinster, 100% for Ospreys. So, that 90% for Leinster is a real kind of G up for them, because they have struggled from the tee and left a lot of points out there in recent games. So, everything's got to go perfect for them in Bilbao if they're going to have any chance of winning. So that's certainly a good omen on that side of things. Doesn't mean that they're going to win. It might just mean that they can keep themselves in the game for some period. Kicking meters then 682 to 522, and kicks retain 9 for Leinster, 2 for Ospreys, so doing very well in the air as well. Lineouts then, Leinster 9 from 11 for 82%. Both lineouts had malfunctions, especially early on. Ospreys 17 from 20 for 85% for them. Lineout steals then 2 each. So both teams putting the opposition line out under pressure. And again, it was especially early on in the game. Scrums 1 then, 3 from 4 for Leinster for 75%, and 4 from 5 for Ospreys for 80%. But Leinster were the one who really were putting the pressure on in that set piece. On to discipline then. 10 penalties conceded by Leinster to 4 from Ospreys. So from the Leinster point of view, certainly a work on, don't want to give away that many penalties against Bordeaux. Can't give them too many ins, and I think, they'd want to certainly knock, 3 or 4 penalties off that tally if they can. Ospreys, kind of one of those positions where they haven't conceded that many penalties, but you almost would have liked them to concede more, because there was a lot of times when it felt like they could have gone a bit harder at Leinster, powder puff at times in defence as well, and maybe that contributed to not too many penalties conceded as well. Attacking penalties then 3-1, and defensive penalties 7-3. Scrum offences 2 each, and line offences 1 for Leinster and none for Ospreys. So let's talk about the team. So we talk about Ospreys first. So, tough assignment, end of the season. Last game, they're away from home, they're in the Aviva. Leinster have a long winning streak there in the URC, and you're against a Leinster team who are basically doing a dress rehearsal and kind of a trial for who's going to get into that 23 for next week in Bilbao for the Champions Cup final. So they were on a hiding to nothing, I think, before the game started. Anyway, a lot of factors against them. Certainly not the best performance of the season. Hasn't been a brilliant season for them altogether, but they have at least finished as the second top Welsh team in the league. So that's certainly something to take from the season itself. Having if you go back to the start of the season, like they were rock bottom of the table as well, very early on in the season. So to get themselves back up the table and weren't in any danger of making the playoffs, but still they finished in 11th place in the league, and that's not too bad. Again, given the start that they had to the season, a good turnaround for them. They got 7 wins out of the season as well. Obviously, this wasn't one of them, but I think it's a season to build on. For them is the best way to put it. On to Leinster then, one of the best performances of the season. So it's good to see them producing that now. At a time when they've had that period where they kind of dipped, and now we're seeing them come back. Like we've seen a proper performance from them, because they last time out, it was kind of, they got the result, but they were stuttering a little bit in the game. But in this one, they looked smooth from minute 1 to minute 80, and a lot of the process going well. The attack looking like it has a real bite to it as well, and returning players coming in, slotting in, not missing a beat. And just a lot of positives coming out of it as well. So again, I feel like that they've got themselves second place in the URC, which means they've got home advantage in the quarterfinal. If they make a semi-final, home advantage in the semi-final as well. But the other thing to consider as well is ahead of next weekend, in the last 2 games, pretty much every player who's going to feature in that 23 will have played the bulk of one of those 2 games in those last 2 weeks. So that's a real positive for them. And the fact as well that we're getting to a point now where if you look at Leinster from last year or the previous few years, it was basically ring fenced 23, maybe 25 players who were involved in the Champions Cup, the knockout stages of the Champions Cup. And then the rest of the squad knew that there weren't any places for them, to even think about for the final. Whereas this year it's completely different. It feels like there's proper competition in the squad, and you can see that actually lifting the performance of every one of those players as well. So I think that's going to have a massive positive effect on the team. You look at players today who may or may not be in the 23, the likes of, you got Jerry Kerr, you got Rabah Slimani, Gus McCarthy in the front row, Dermot Mangan, who was excellent in the second row, and then, James Lowe coming back, Jordan Larmour, who, probably nobody was thinking about Jordan Larmour being anywhere near the 23 for Bilbao. Probably won't make the squad. Maybe depends. Tommy O'Brien was a late withdrawal before the game, so if he's not fit, then maybe Larmour comes into the equation there. So, he's done himself, justice as well. Furlong looked good off the bench, as did Max Deegan. Fintan Gunn actually, probably one of the best performances seen from him off the bench as well today. And putting pressure on McGrath maybe for that backup spot for 9. Kieran Frawley looked assured coming on, and pretty sure, at this stage now, he is going to be the backup 10 for the final. Hugh Cooney, 2 weeks in a row now, he's actually had good performances off the bench as well. So there's, Alex Usnov as well there. So plenty of players putting their hands up from the wider squad. A lot of them probably won't make the 23 for the final, but there are players there, the likes of Mangan, who maybe have forced their way into reckoning for the 23, but you feel like now the next week of training, at least, those players feel like they've been given a fair shot at potentially forcing their way into that match day squad. So I think the whole atmosphere, therefore, around training is going to be a lot better than, again, it felt like from the outside, at least, that it was 2 separate camps, but now it feels like one camp with massive competition between everybody for places. And just another word, because certainly it's possible with Boyle coming back that we may not see too much of him for the rest of the season. I'm hoping he at least gets time in the URC knockouts, as far as Leinster go, whether that's just a quarter final and get knocked out. But Jerry Kerr, a guy who was basically playing rugby part-time, working a full-time job, basically going back to the old amateur era. And the way he stepped up this year, has been absolutely fantastic. And, I'm delighted that he's got himself a professional contract over at Connacht. And I think, there with Lancaster as well, I think he's going to go from, stride to stride over there and be absolutely amazing. And I'm delighted for him. And, I'm not one of these Leinster fans who begrudges players going to other provinces to get game time. The same with Kieran Frawley, who's also going over to Connacht. I'd rather see these guys playing week in, week out, than have them appear in a Leinster team when all the big boys are away with Ireland, or you're being rested for Champions Cup or wherever. So I think he is, whatever happens for the rest of Leinster season, he certainly is one of the, the good news stories of this season, and I think it's just absolutely brilliant to see. But in terms of Leinster, as I said, second now in the table, that they can't be caught, given the results from yesterday, and given that there's only one game to go, and that basically deciding who's going to finish in the top 8. So they've got the home quarter final. If they win that, they've got the home semi-final, and then if they win that, obviously they have a chance, albeit away from home, to retain their title as well. So whatever happens next weekend, I hope that they give it a real shot, and it's not a case of just reverting back to that old way of, okay, the big boys are playing in the Champions Cup, so now we'll have a separate team training on their own, for the URC knockout stages. It's proven, previously that it doesn't really work for the team when they've been in Champions Cup final. Obviously last year they didn't make the final, they're eliminated at semi-final stage, and therefore they had to focus on the URC. I hope this year now the URC gets a bit more focus as well, whatever happens in the Champions Cup. But yeah, delighted with the performance today, and let's see how they do in knockout stages.